tagged monarch butterflies with her students in Illinois and had some make it to Mexico. They both became interested in monarch butterflies in the Southwest after traveling with Southwest Monarch Study scientists to the monarch butterfly sites in Mexico and California. This evening's presentation is Prescott Monarch Butterflies, the latest story.
Do you have the clicker?
Yeah, I do.
Ready to go. Thank you very much, Audubon, for inviting us here tonight to talk about monarchs. Our front slide there, you can see, well, actually it's the back slide, some photos from Michoacan, Mexico, where they overwinter. And we'll also talk about California overwintering there very briefly. But we'll also talk mainly about Prescott. The middle shot there is along the Pea Vine Trail. And actually you can see all the annual sunflowers are wonderful nectar plants for the monarchs. He's got the control. Okay. The monarch butterfly is a milkweed butterfly, and actually we have 3 milkweed butterflies in Arizona. The soldier is way south, very rare in the southeast part of Arizona. But throughout our area here, we definitely have monarchs and a lot of queens. The one thing that really blows my mind is that they actually weigh less than a small paper clip, but yet they're tough enough to travel over 2,000 miles to Mexico or to California. They're also in a group called brush-footed butterflies. This includes like the fritillaria, ladies, painted ladies, buckeyes. But when you look at the adults here, how many legs do you see? Right. It's like they're missing a whole pair of legs. But no, they do have them. But they're the very front legs, they're a little smaller than the back pairs of legs. They're very reduced. And you can see where the arrows are, where these legs are. They're folded up against the thorax most of the time. But they also have these very sharp hairs on them, thus the name brush-footed. These are very important to the female monarch because she has to tell if a plant is a milkweed or not, or if it's the right milkweed. So what she does is she'll land on a leaf, and with her forelegs, the front legs, she'll start drumming the leaf, pounding it with those sharp hairs, and they go through the cuticle, and then the plant releases some juices, and she actually tastes with her feet. So she has the chemoreceptors on the bottom there to pick up then the taste. Not all milkweed are equal. Some have more toxicity than others. So they may not, may land on a milkweed and then, I don't like this one, and move on. How many of you have been down to Phoenix, the Rio Salado? This is just gorgeous. The headquarters for Arizona Audubon. In their side yard, they have this lovely garden with the life cycle of the monarch butterfly. And if you see on the bottom left there, you have the adult. I can just go through the cycle just for a review. And I've got this great photo from David Mall of an egg. They're about the size of a pinhead when they're laid. And thank you. They take about 3 days to develop the actual little larva. The larva will hatch out and then eat the egg case. You don't leave any waste behind, you want to recycle. And then they start devouring the milkweed. And they have an incredible growth rate. We can compare it actually to a human baby. If that baby was eating the amount of food that the caterpillar does and grow, in 1 month that baby would be the size of a double-decker bus. So this is how fast they're eating. You may want to check out, I brought in one larva. It's a queen, a larva in the back there who's only 5 days old. So usually they'll be in that stage around 15 days, and then they go into the chrysalis, where a lot happens, obviously. That's usually about 12 days, and then the adult will emerge. Altogether, about 30 days for that cycle, but if it's really cool out, it could be 45 days. So temperature is really important. The adult monarchs in the summertime will live 2 to 6 weeks. When they finally start laying their eggs, they only have a week to live. The ones that come out in the fall are usually the ones, they're sexually in diapause, and they're the ones that will migrate down to Mexico or California. And that's dependent on usually the angle of the sun is a biggie, and day length and senescence of plants. And those will live anywhere from 6 to 8 months. These are the guys who head south or to California. They've never been to the overwintering areas, and somehow they make it. This is a newer map of the monarch migration for spring and fall. Out east, they have it more or less worked out because the tagging program for eastern monarchs has existed a lot longer than Southwest Monarch Study, which has been around about 12 years as far as tagging. And if you look at Arizona area, the Southwest, a lot of unknowns. For example, right now in the spring, where are these monarchs coming from? We really don't know. They haven't found any tagged, which, well, if you want to help out, who knows? Maybe one that you have tagged, or you'll find one that has a tag on it and will give us a lot more information. They say about 1/3 of the monarchs from the 12 years of data, 1/3 will go to California, the coast, and 2/3 down to Mexico from Arizona.
Okay. El Rosario Monarch Butterfly Sanctuary is in the state of Michoacan, and it's one of the 5 major sites. It can have up to 50% of the wintering monarchs in Mexico, so it's a very important site. You can see here the layering of the monarchs in the fir trees. The main tree that they like to winter in is a species of fir, Abies religiosa, called oyamel, or the sacred fir. This tree is found at fairly high elevations, about 7,000 to 14,000 feet. So hiking up to these sites, even though we're at a high elevation in Prescott, you do notice the difference. The rainfall is high in the summer, but there are cool, humid summers and dry winters. Only about 2% of this forest type remains. So this high elevation fir forest is something that could disappear if care is not taken. Associated with these reserves often are meadows. And as you'll see in the next slide, the monarchs come down when it's warm, stream from the trees into the meadows, and they nectar on the wildflowers. Now, I'm not sure how we're going to...
It's supposed to be a video.
I might have to do this from here. So this is a warm day in February in 2014, and the monarchs stream from the trees, and they're nectaring, starting to mate. And interestingly, when a cloud comes over, they fly back to the trees. I guess they didn't want to get caught when it's cold. And then when the cloud passes, they fly again. And, you know, it's like orange snow. It's like nothing you've ever seen.
I think it's the first time we used that video option.
Okay, we'll move on. In Mexico, the monarchs that have been tagged in the U.S. Are recovered. Certainly not all of them are recovered. But the tour guides, the horse handlers, the end of the season, they will go through the dead piles of monarchs. There are a lot that do die, that don't make it out of Mexico, and look for the tags. The tags are about 9 millimeters across, and they're placed on the distal cell, so to speak, on the wing. And this picture up here is Gail Morris from Southwest Monarch Study, and she's, in 2004 at least, she was paying 5 pesos per tag. And
okay, this is a graph from Monarch Watch, which is showing the population of the monarchs measured in hectares throughout the years there, starting in 1994. They don't actually count the individual monarchs because there are just so many of them, and so they just measure how many hectares of trees covered with monarchs. So California is different. They actually count the individual ones there. Overall, you could see the downward trend, still in decline. We have 2 red arrows on either side at 6 hectares. This is the scientists believe that this would be a very good sustainable level for the monarchs, but we definitely have a ways to go as far as trying to get that up. There are big concerns about having massive storms and then having large die out. Luckily, there are like 7 main biospheres, but they do find these monarchs throughout the mountains there in Michoacan. If you look at 2015-16, you can see that that had 4.01 hectares, and that, let's see, it was in March of 2016, there was a massive ice storm. And what happens if the monarchs get wet, they can't handle freezing temperatures. They can handle a freeze, but if they're wet, they're goners. So about 50% of the population died in that big storm. And hopefully we don't continue to see these. Who knows? Luckily, in last summer, 2016 then, it was so warm going into the autumn that across the United States, we actually had a 5th generation of adults emerge from chrysalids. Usually the frost is earlier, those chrysalises would have died. But luckily, quite a few then made it. Usually they have 4 generations of monarchs as they travel up through the states, or they'll stay in an area if they have a lot of good nectar. But last summer, there were 5 generations because it was so warm. Dr. Karen Oberhauser, we just went to one of her lectures in February. She's at the University of Minnesota. She's one of the top monarch researchers. And she said that the smoking gun for this decline essentially started in the mid-90s when they started to use and increase glyphosates, which is a herbicide. And they developed the GMO-resistant crops, and so they were able to spread the field completely. The lower left there you can see is soybean, And there are no weeds whatsoever. But back in the 90s, you would see a lot of milkweed in those rows. And that's where they think that a lot of the monarchs, most of the monarchs, came from these croplands, utilizing the milkweed that was in the crop areas on the edge. The top left graph is showing the blue is the monarch population. The green is the amount of glyphosates that, as you can see, has gone right up. And then red is showing the amount of acreage in corn. And so they're planting more corn and probably soybeans, but mainly the corn is increasing. And so you have more loss of habitat. So that's a big concern. And then on the right there, that just simply shows the red line there, the amount of glyphosates being used. And that's gone right up. Some good things. The middle photo, you see the mowing along the road. Illinois finally decided to put in some new regulations, and they're not going to mow as much along their highways, and that will help save some of the milkweed there. On the lower right, that is from Michoacan. Those brown trees are not dead. They are covered with monarch butterflies. And of course, there are concerns there about loss of the fir trees. The population of people there are very, very poor. They don't have indoor heating. They have to use the wood for cooking. And so there are a lot of things that hopefully we'll see some changes there to help the local population.
In California, about a third of our monarchs go to California, and not nearly the number, of course, in Mexico, but they do overwinter in eucalyptus trees. There's still blooms there in the fall, so they can still nectar, on the flowers. They're also in Monterey cypress and in some locations pines. Pismo Beach is one of the big places where volunteers are involved at this state park or beach. There are spotters that are looking for our tags in California. Basically, they're looking through spotting scopes and looking for these little tags and trying to find the numbers on those tags. One of the ones that made it from the Prescott area, the person spotting, it took him an hour and a half to determine the numbers on the small tag. So it can take a lot of effort to get this type of feedback. The numbers in California are staying low, despite many more sites being monitored by volunteers there. Like the rest of the U.S., the reason for this decline is thought to be habitat loss.
This is a map from Journey North. Some of you may have been on that site. They have all sorts of maps showing migration of birds, and they also have the monarch. People call in. This is a map showing first adults sighted. And you can see the white and yellow ones are, those would be the monarchs coming up from Mexico. This year, the migration has been very fast. By, let's say, March, beginning of March, that's when they leave Mexico. At the end of March, the leading edge was 1,000 miles north in Oklahoma. Why? What's going on? It was very warm, and they were getting a lot of south winds. And unfortunately, though, the milkweed was not very far up. And so a lot of eggs probably did not survive, or larvae survived, because there just wasn't enough milkweed at that time. And you can see again in the southwest, just a lot of unknowns there. Again, where are these coming from? May 3rd, or actually March 3rd, May 3rd, someone called in, verified the monarch in Prescott Valley, and that's about a month earlier than what we've seen in the last 3 years. But, you know, a lot of variables there as far as just missing them when they're coming. This shows Arizona hotspots, and there's Prescott. We are a hotspot. And also, you may not have known this, but monarchs overwinter in Arizona. And along, starting in Yuma, all the way up the Colorado River to Lake Havasu. And Rio Salado, there has been continuously, year after year, population there that overwinters, and in gardens throughout the Phoenix area, if they've got milkweed or nectar plants. But once it gets too hot in the upper 90s, they're out of there. They cannot survive in hot temperatures in the lower desert. Wickenburg, this year, they actually had monarchs overwintering. And I guess they were feeding on seep willow. That's how they kept on going through the winter. Okay, so in 2014, we became research associates with Southwest Monarch Study, and we started to recruit people to help with spotting monarchs and to help tag. And I'll be doing some more workshops this summer. If you're interested, sign up on the back sheet there. If you want to get involved being a citizen scientist, as far as that goes. And obviously, without all these volunteers, we wouldn't have this data. This is showing the 3 years since 2014 when we started. And you can see the observers have gone up. We have more people. Locations that people are letting us know where the monarchs are. And thank you, David, too. As far as all of a sudden going, oh, yeah, I didn't notice these here. And then plant species have gone up a little bit. But you can see the season there. It is longer. It was longer last year, definitely, the season for observing and finding monarchs.
Like 3 weeks longer, yeah.
Yeah, the warm autumn. Down the bottom chart there, for each year, we're showing the larvae that were spotted, the adults, total observed, and then tagged. And you can see definitely 2016 was a biggie. We had a lot of monarchs, and we were able to tag quite a few that were migrating through. And that correlated with when I talked to Gail Morris of Southwest Monarch Study. She said that for the whole state, it was a huge year as far as monarchs.
Okay, this is some of our hard and painful data, many trips to the field. But basically, this is monarch sightings by date in 2016. And the first substantial reports of monarchs in 2016 was around June 29th, somewhere in here. The last report was November 17th, which kind of correlated with the first hard frost, at least where we live. The larvae are more limited in when they can be found, as you might expect. They were found from August 13th to October 19th. And this big increase in numbers, particularly of adults, this is the migration. This is when they're coming through Prescott area. And if you remember from an earlier slide, instead of having a frost in late October, we got these additional weeks and many more making it through the Prescott area. Okay, the main food for monarch egg laying and larvae are milkweeds. The The genus Asclepius is what we associate with milkweeds here, but there are some vine milkweeds as well in the genus Fenustrum, and we essentially don't know anything about monarch interaction with them, at least in our area. Monarchs are milkweed-utilizing butterflies, like the queen, also in our area. They're using probably 4 local native milkweed species and at least 3 other introduced milkweed species in our area. And again, the only food for the larvae. As a nectar source, milkweed nectar is high in dextrose, and there are many different insects which utilize milkweed, and there's a poster board in the back that shows some of the things that you can see on milkweed. Milkweed gets its name from its milky sap or latex. At least one of the native species in our area does not produce the latex, but most do. They produce alkaloids, cardiac glycosides, toxins. At least one species, the most common one in our area, horsetail milkweed, produces a neurotoxic resinoid galatoxin, which is toxic to mammals and birds. These toxins accumulate in the wings and the exoskeletons of the butterflies, and they are toxic to vertebrate herbivores, and certainly horsetail milkweed sometimes is a concern in pastures. In Yavapai County, let's start with the U.S. first. About 72 species. I've seen higher numbers than this, but this is from Xerces Society information. Texas is number 1 in species diversity as far as milkweeds. We're number 2, so we have a good representation of milkweeds in Arizona. 10 species of Asclepius in Yavapai County, according to SciNet. About 18 species within a 100-mile radius of Prescott, so our area is fairly rich in milkweed species. And also we have the vine milkweeds, which we again know less about. Okay, if we look at milkweeds and adult and larvae sightings over the 3 years, our most abundant milkweed, horsetail milkweed, by far has the greatest number of reports of adults as well as larvae. Tropical milkweed is an annual in our area. It's not native to the U.S., but monarchs love it. There are only small plantings of this in our area, yet high reports from this particular milkweed. We also saw them utilizing this in Mexico in people's gardens, for example. Showy milkweed, again, not native to Yavapai County. It's been introduced by one local nursery as well as the NAU milkweed test program, and seems to attract monarchs. 2 of our very nice native milkweeds, butterfly milkweed and spider milkweed, we get low reports, just larvae occasionally from them. And I think that relates to flowering time. They flower, butterfly milkweed flowers in May, spider milkweed early, but also sometimes later. But they may be flowering before the monarchs are in our area. And then common milkweed, which 90% of the monarchs in the U.S. are raised on in the Midwest and the East. A Iowa farmer also lives here in Prescott, and he's brought some common milkweed from his farm in Iowa. And in his backyard, he finds caterpillars on it. And so some of these milkweeds are being moved around. Hopefully it won't cause any major problems. And broadleaf milkweed is not considered to be a strong milkweed for attracting monarchs. A few pictures. This is horsetail milkweed, our number 1 for reproduction. It produces white flowers. It's rhizomatous. It occurs in drainages, vacant lots, people's yards, pastures. It likes a little bit more water than normal, so it's usually on areas where there's some slope. You can see it produces the typical milkweed pods. They are a little more elongated. And of course, the typical milkweed seeds with the filaments or silk. Tropical milkweed has naturalized in several parts of the U.S., mostly the Gulf Coast and Southern California. It is easily grown in pots in one's yard. And it is raised as a cut flower. This is at Whipstone Farms in 2005, and they had maybe a 20-foot row, and we quickly found 28 larvae. So it's a plant that monarchs really like. They seem to like the most poisonous ones. Horsetail and tropical are higher in the toxins. Showy milkweed, more northern than our county, more to the northeast and some to the northwest. It seems to attract monarchs as well. Butterfly milkweed in the west can be yellow or orange. In the east, it's orange. And we have not received large numbers of reports of monarchs on this in our area, but also there's not a lot of them compared to horsetail milkweed. Likewise with spider milkweed, you'll see them here and there, individuals, 2 or 3 plants, but they don't form large stands like horsetail milkweed does. Okay, most utilized plants overall. This includes nectar and plants used for reproduction. The data has been really skewed from 2016 for rubber rabbitbrush because of the longer migration season. Huge numbers were found on rubber rabbitbrush, a dependable nectar source till frost. Horsetail milkweed used for both reproduction and nectaring, usually many sightings. We also get reports from butterfly bush and Mexican sunflower from people's yards and commercial plantings. And then annual sunflower, we have large numbers of that. And in 2014, we thought that was the plant. But our data since then have been lower, and it seemed like a timing thing where the monarchs were not coming through and the annual sunflowers were kind of finishing up. So this timing between monarch movements and the freshness of a plant, the desirability of the plant seems to be a factor. But there seems to be about 6 or 8 major plants that they really like.
If you want to attract butterflies to your yard, of course, if you want to get the monarchs and the queens, you should have some milkweeds there. But you don't have to have milkweed. Nectar plants are just as important as far as bringing them into your yard. At night, they go up into trees, tall shrubs, and so on, if you have something like that around. And in the Southwest, they do actually go to puddles, to mud puddles. You don't see that out east, for obvious reasons, in the Southwest because it's so dry. We always say, get some large splashes of color in your yard. Examples, red, yellow, orange, pink, and purple are the biggies for butterflies to notice. And of course, your flat-topped flowers like the Mexican sunflowers on the right there, and then clusters of flowers with short flower tubes. They just adore the butterfly bushes. And here we can see that, again, to emphasize the plants that go to frost, because if they don't get enough fat build up, those are the ones who are dying and falling to the forest floor in Mexico and California. So the Mexican sunflower on the left, that goes to frost, butterfly bush, and down in the middle there, the rabbit brush so important too now that we've seen this in the last year. And tropical milkweed goes right to frost.
Okay. Major local habitats in the Prescott area. If you want to find monarchs, go to places where there are stands of horsetail milkweed, as well as annual sunflowers. In landscapes, butterfly bush towards the end of the summer. And during the migration, you know, the plant that seems to fatten them up and they're attracted to is rubber rabbit brush. Willow Lake and Watson Woods now are monarch way stations. We've put up signs at both of those places. And Willow Lake, here we're tagging in the summer from horsetail milkweed, but later on the annual sunflowers come in. Here you can see both sunflowers, and the milkweed has gone to seed here, and it's less attractive at that stage in its life cycle. There are a few rabbit brush plants out there, and there are a few trees that we don't respect too well, Siberian elm, salt cedar, but they need a roosting place at night. And they will go to these trees because they're the only trees there. So sometimes a plant that we don't have a high regard for may have some benefits that we don't realize. Prescott Lakes Parkway, they've planted a lot of rabbit brush there, and it's naturalized all over, and the monarchs utilize it. The interesting thing is a lot of the rabbit brush does not flower at the same time. Maybe there are different cultivars that were planted, and that's the reason, or it's gone back to the wild type where there are microclimates. But for many weeks, some are starting to produce seed, and others are just starting to flower. So there's a long flowering period with this plant that seems to benefit monarchs during the migration. Granville and Stone Ridge are somewhat similar. Planted rabbit brush, and a lot has escaped and naturalized in some of the drainages. Last year was the first year we knew about Granville, and some days we were tagging almost 100 monarchs. So it was incredible to see how many were in that area.
This is Walnut Meadow Restoration, which is located in the Highland Center for Natural History. And Audubon has a very close tie to this meadow. Every year, since we ripped out a lot of invasive weeds there, we're seeing more horsetail milkweed popping up and more monarchs. In the lower right photo there by David Mull, the day before that one was taken, I noticed a monarch coming through laying eggs, which I'd actually never seen a female laying eggs. And there it was in Walnut Meadow. And then David the next day was able to get a shot of that egg. And last summer we got done hearing reports from the Highland Center. There were more there. And so that is definitely a monarch way station. And the restoration was started in 2011 with the support of Audubon Together Green Grant. And then we brought in four organizations that went in and weeded and helped put seed and plants in. That included the Native Plant Society, Prescott Audubon, Master Gardeners, and of course the Highland Center. Insect predators. Well, actually I put this one in because I wanted to get some bird pictures in here. But I decided to put some of these insects in here. You notice the smiley face on the crab spider. That was from Suzanne Yoder. And the right one, that was in our backyard. The crab spider got the painted lady, I believe. And in the fall when we're tagging, when those praying mantises are really big, we see them eating the monarchs. So they don't have a problem with the glaucosides. And then we're going to see some birds here. But You see the toxins eaten by the caterpillar is passed on to the adult stage, and it also protects the adult. This is a classic experiment with a blue jay where they fed it a monarch butterfly. It ate it very quickly, and then it started to vomit it up. And so we're assuming that he probably will never go after a orange and black butterfly again. But this is fascinating. There are some birds who have adapted to being able to eat the monarchs down in the wintering areas. I mean, there are masses of these things, you know. So one of them is our black-headed grosbeak, and it only eats the abdomen. You see that? The wings, the exoskeleton has most of the toxin in there. Also, the black-backed oriole has less tolerance than the grosbeak, and what they do is they taste the monarch. Can you see the holes in the abdomen in the lower left there? And about half of the monarchs are not toxic. It all depends on what it ate as a caterpillar. Like if it was feeding on a tuberosa or butterfly weed, it has very low glycosides. And so this bird has learned to taste them, and then this one was rejected. But if there's very little toxics in there, they'll slit the abdomen open and eat the fat. It won't even take the exoskeleton, the abdomen. They will feed for a couple days on monarchs, and then they stop. It's like then we're assuming the toxin level goes down in their bodies, and then they'll start feeding again. So, really fascinating.
At Granville, we spent several weeks down there tagging, a group of us, and we were accompanied by a family of roadrunners, 2 adults and an immature, and most of the time they were feeding on ground insects, moving around. There was one immature that kind of stayed under a shrub, but it seemed to tolerate us. We were very close to it. But one day we observed that these northern roadrunners were hopping up to the top of the shrubs and grabbing butterflies, monarchs, queens, painted ladies, and just chowing them down like potato chips. I mean, it was, in 2 minutes I saw like 6 butterflies eaten. They were really going to town. But we came back the next day, and thereafter they never ate them again. So I guess they must have learned the hard way that maybe queens and monarchs, which have toxins, are not the best food source. This graphic shows recoveries in California from Arizona. And we have, monarchs make it to Mexico as well. And from modeling studies, they think the wind direction at 1,000 feet determines if they go to Mexico or California. That's the latest thinking. And we had one butterfly from Prescott make it to California. We think it's the first one that's been reported as far as we know, or first one that's been found at least. And this is the butterfly here, the adult. And it was actually collected as a larva in this area on Mariposa Lane, and they were mowing that area and mowing the milkweed. So Suzanne Yoder, saved it and raised it in a screened container and raised it to as an adult and tagged it and released it, and it made this long journey to California. We had 3 other monarchs that we tagged from Granville, Prescott Valley, also make it to California. And they were all, caught on or near rabbit brush. And monarchs can travel up to 50 miles a day. And of course, they rely on the wind also quite a bit. But some of these monarchs were traveling 8 to 12 miles per day on their way to California. Again, the wind direction at 1,000 feet determines which way they go. And they tend to ride the thermals. So, they may be up high and we're not seeing them, but they are on their journey. Okay. We've had a lot of volunteers that helped with the removal of invasive plants at Walnut Meadow. You may see some of these people in the room here today. We've also had a number of volunteers that have helped with sighting and tagging of monarchs. Here's Gail Mars giving a workshop. Over the last 3 years, we've had a large number of volunteers each year that have really made the difference. We lost one of our best friends and volunteers, Al Lodwick, this past year. He was a great photographer and spotter and tagger. So we'll stop here and happy to answer any questions you may have. Well, yeah, all of the basic nutrients that might be needed would be there and available if they can digest them, certainly.
All right, so that, but somehow they know to use milkweed in order to get the toxins. They don't, without milkweed, do they eat other things? You said some of the adults are not toxic.
There are occasionally other plants that they will eat. We had an adult at an event last year, and we put flowers in, and it wasn't nectaring on them. So someone put a piece of watermelon in there, and it went right to the watermelon. And
no, they only eat milkweed.
They're pretty restricted.
That is it. That is it.
But they eat a lot.
I'm wondering if you have any idea of how to protect the chrysalises that we're seeing overwintering. It's hard to know. We see them hanging, but we're not sure if there's a way to protect the chrysalises during some of the colder, seasons. Is there anything we can do to protect them?
I'll let Cathy answer that. Our back deck had,
I would just say
had maybe 30 different cages
life,
with
as
caterpillars
far as
last year.
You could take them in the house if you wanted to, but
yeah, we know people have built a screened enclosure and yeah. Mm-hmm.
They'll protect them from predation too. Come out. Yeah.
Yes and no, I guess. Monarchs are pollinators, and certainly, other insects and organisms are suffering in some cases because of habitat loss, and I think, this is another illustration of that. Now, butterflies are not nearly as good pollinators as bees, but they still do some.
Question? That's yours, Bob. That's a glyphosate.
I just want to say, Roundup is glyphosate.
Right.
Correct. But its patents have run out, so I know Dow Chemical and some others are, producing it. And We were just at the Native Plant Society botany meeting, and they're using Roundup to control invasives in the Tucson area. And there are different forms of it, though. To get a new patent, Monsanto put a sticker spreader in the glyphosate product, and it appears that additive is what's affecting amphibian reproduction. So they have a aquatic safe form of it without those additional ingredients in it. So, you know, there's a number of different chemicals. Likewise, Roundup is not the only thing used on crops. There are other broad-spectrum herbicides that the plants have been developed to be resistant to. But all our major crops, corn, soybeans, cotton, and so forth, now are herbicide resistant. So Roundup can be used as a broad-spectrum herbicide. So there is a huge use of it, no question.
I know that there was another thing that would attack monarch butterflies. That was small grade fly that would parasitize the caterpillar. Then when it got pupa or chrysalis, that's when the adult fly would come. Is that found around here?
Yes.
Yes, we had 2 cases. No, actually 3. It took in, and it's, pardon? Yeah, yeah. It's pretty gross. I had them in my classroom in Illinois, and one had been parasitized. And walked in one time, and there's a string hanging with the pupa that came out of this poor chrysalis, or it could be a caterpillar also. And of course, the students weren't all that happy about seeing that. But, you know, it's one of the cycles there.
Yes.
Has there been any research or thinking about what initiates the migration, let's say, north again from Mexico or east from California? Is it temperature? Is it daylight photo period? And the concern about getting desynchronized with temperatures warming if the temperature is the trigger, yet the plants won't be ready. So what kind of issues are revolving around that?
I'd say all those issues.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's obviously when that sun came out down in Mexico, they started flying more. And when it starts warming up, they leave the trees instead of just huddling there like they do most of the winter.
But they don't fly north yet, they just nectar.
They start nectaring, a little mating going on, and as it warms up, then they start heading out. But as far as research, I haven't read anything as far as when they leave the overwintering areas. But yeah, definitely there would be a concern, you know, if
And
things
just
are
like-
warming up.
Just like with birds, you know, the distributions are changing with butterflies. I think the Boston Butterfly Club 5 years ago saw southern butterflies that they've never seen that far north before. So I'm sure changes are occurring with monarchs as well.
Okay, any other questions? All right,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.